So this happened about 5 years ago, while I was 9 months pregnant. I was Christmas shopping at the mall with my then 7 and 15-year-old daughters, one Saturday night in a very safe city, with a very low crime rate. There was an Applebee's connected to the mall, and we ended our shopping pretty late. The mall stores were all starting to close, so I took my kids to the connected Applebee's for a late dinner. We finish up eating at about 10 p.m. and leave out the Applebee's entrance into the practically deserted parking lot with our shopping bags in tow. As we got to the car, I was in the middle of maneuvering the shopping bags on my arms to find my keys, when a 50-ish-year-old crusty-looking man starts walking up from somewhere in the parking lot. He had shaggy gray-white hair and a faded flannel shirt with old jeans. I noticed him briskly approaching when he was about 40 feet away, and he started to speak. "This is a stick-up. Give me all your money." My blood ran cold, and I stared at him owlishly while shaking. He then said he was just kidding, and came up and stood right next to my daughters, who were standing on the other side of the car, waiting for me to unlock it and let them in. He starts making small talk with me and my girls. He was asking things like if they were good girls for Santa, how old they were, if we got all our Christmas shopping done, and what kind of things we got. He didn't seem to be drunk, high, slow, or mentally challenged at all. He was very coherent and seemed of sound mind. Mind you, I was a heavily pregnant woman, along with my 2 daughters in a mostly deserted parking lot at 10 o'clock at night, who was being approached by a stranger who came out of nowhere and walked right up next to my kids on the other side of the car. He was just talking to me and my kids with his hands in his pockets, very often looking over his shoulder. I didn't want to aggravate him, so I was politely conversing with him and trying to look calm and nonchalant, all the while trying to disguise my frantic hands, digging inside of my giant purse for my car keys. This whole exchange went on for a couple of minutes, while he periodically kept looking over his shoulder. I was silently panicking while I was politely trying to keep the situation from escalating, nonchalantly speaking with him while also trying in vain to find my damn car keys to get us out of there. They were hiding in there good. I felt that at any moment he was going to pull a knife or a gun or rob me. My kids were right next to him, away from their mother, and I couldn't find my goddamn car keys to get my kids to the safety of the car. He kept trying to engage them in conversation, and I could see that my oldest daughter was becoming weirded out. She kept glancing at me to gauge my assessment of the situation. Kids often tend not to recognize the potential danger when they're with their parents, since they see us as their protectors. And being that he was only talking and acting pretty friendly, I was doing my best to stay calm. They were oblivious to the alarming situation that we all were in, and being 9 months pregnant, I was no match for this full-grown man. While still desperately digging around for my keys, I tried to politely give him hints that the conversation was over by saying things like, "It's nice chatting with you, but I gotta get these kids to bed," and "It was nice meeting you," telling my girls to say that it was nice meeting him too. My polite attempts to get this man to leave weren't working, because he kept sidestepping every attempt, asking them more personal things like their favorite school subjects, saying how nice young ladies they were. My outgoing 7-year-old was completely oblivious to how not okay the situation was, because he was being friendly, and because of the whole "I'm with mommy so I'm safe" child mentality. So she started to talk about what she picked out for Daddy for Christmas, and started enthusiastically talking about kid stuff, asking him if he knew what Minecraft was, and keeping this creep from leaving us alone by keeping him engaged in conversation. They didn't realize that I was becoming desperate to get them the hell out of there. Then I suddenly felt this sinking feeling of dread when I realized that I may have lost my keys somewhere in the mall, and that we were stuck outside with this strange man who kept looking paranoid over his shoulders and was showing no signs of getting ready to leave. I was thinking that he was waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. All he had to do was grab one of my girls, threaten their life, and knowing it would make me do whatever he wanted as long as he wouldn't hurt them. I started to feel my adrenaline starting to spike, and my heart and stomach started doing flip-flops. I felt like at any moment shit was going to go down, as the gravity of realizing that there were no other people or witnesses around, and that we were totally alone. The odds were stacked against us, and that he had his chance. Then, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, "Okay, it was nice talking with you. See you later." And he walked off in the same direction as which he came. It wasn't until then that I found my car keys, unlocked the car, and told my kids to get in fast. I got in too and locked the doors, and started the car and drove the hell out of there. My 15-year-old lightheartedly and jokingly said, "Okay, that was weird," and laughed. I was overwhelmed with relief, and I was confused over what had just happened. I thought to myself, why the hell would a guy of seemingly sound mind think it just totally acceptable to go out of his way to approach us in a deserted parking lot, just to chit-chat? Being that nothing bad happened, I brushed it off and joked with them too. When we got home, my husband greeted us and asked us how shopping went. I said it went well, and my 15-year-old told him what had happened at the parking lot and how weird it was. She was still joking about it. I started joking too, saying how I was mentally having a panic attack while trying to look calm. I started making fun of myself and my inability to find my car keys. My husband went completely white, and I acknowledged his horrified look of alarm. I assured him that, albeit creepy, the guy was just talking and eventually left all by his own. Now, my father-in-law is a retired sheriff deputy, and my husband went through police academy training after graduating high school. Being that the knowledge he gained from that, plus growing up with a cop for a dad, I found out why my husband looked absolutely horrified when I told him the details. What my husband told me completely rattled me to the bone. My husband told me that he was 100% sure that the reason why the man was waiting around for us and chit-chatting was because he was waiting for me to unlock the car. The reason why he was standing next to our kids was because once I unlocked the car and the kids started to get inside, he was most likely going to force himself into the car with the kids and hold a knife or gun to them to gain leverage on me to force me to cooperate. That would force me to get into the car with them and do whatever he wanted me to, which most likely would be to drive to a remote location and do God knows what. Being that he wasn't wearing a mask, this also suggests his intentions were to leave no witnesses to identify him. I then remembered that he was positioned by the backseat passenger door, while my 7-year-old was standing by waiting to get in. My husband told me that the most likely reason why the man ended up leaving was because I took so long to find my keys, and the longer it took, the more anxious and spooked it made him. The whole time, I was desperate to find my car keys, which through some sort of divine interpretation stayed hidden deep within my purse, thus saving us from being potentially abducted. This story happened to me around 6 months ago. I've lived where I lived for 3 years. It's a nice apartment with an amazing location, but they were built in the late 90s. The last few years, the city I live in has had a massive population boom, and people have been non-stop pouring in. Good weather, amazing economy, cool place to do stuff always. Because of this, I've seen the landlord's staff start to do heavy maintenance on the apartments to bring them up to date to attract more people to them. My neighbor lived in his apartment for something like 6 years before he finally ended up buying a house and moved. When he moved, the landlord immediately started redoing his apartment as one of the ones to bring up to date. The way that the apartment layout is, There are two stories. Where my bedroom is, on the direct side of the bedroom wall, is the staircase in my neighbor's apartment. The way my bedroom layout is, has my bed right up against that wall. They were completely stripping this place clean. It was one of the first ones that they had done such heavy remodeling to. For weeks I would always see the workers over there painting and redoing the floors. A few days before this happened was no different. I left and saw them doing maintenance on the kitchen, and when I came home from work they were all gone for the day. Nothing unusual, a single bit. The part that is unusual is what happened on one particular night. I was awake at around 1 a.m., watching TV in my room, when I heard someone on the other side of the wall slowly walking up the stairs and very obviously stopping halfway up. Where the person was stopping was directly where my head laid on the other side of the wall. I could feel him listening to me breathing. I immediately turned the TV sound off and sat there extremely quiet and still. I heard nothing at first for a few minutes, but after what felt like an absolute eternity, I heard the person start walking the rest of the stairs to the second floor. My survival instinct kicked in instantly. It was very obvious that whoever was on the other side of that wall was listening to me. I also knew that it was only a few days before this happened that I saw the maintenance redoing that apartment's kitchen. There was no way someone had moved in that fast. I quietly got out of bed and went to a room where I had a better view of the outside of the apartment. I obviously couldn't see if there was movement in there from the window, but I had a good angle to see if anyone walked out. I sat there for about 15 minutes, just staring outside to see if I saw anything at all. Nothing. I went back into my room and lay down in bed again. I didn't play the TV. I just sat there waiting to hear something again. I was messing around on my phone for about 20 minutes in silence, until I heard movement in the stairs again. This time, though, the movement didn't start from the top or the bottom. The movement started in the middle of the staircase, meaning that the entire time I was sitting there in silence, this person was just sat on the other side of the wall, listening to my every move. This terrified me, so I called the cops right away. I gave them all the information of what was going on, and they informed me that someone would be out very soon. I went back to the one room and watched out the window again. Only a few minutes later, a police car pulled up and a cop got out to examine the building and apartment. He was looking around and shining his light in the windows. I heard him knock on the door, and shortly after, I could hear him talking to someone, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I was totally puzzled by this. The officer walked over to my door and knocked. I went downstairs and he informed me very nicely that someone had just moved in there. I laughed and was completely embarrassed. I even said to the cop that it was a hell of a way to meet your new neighbor. I felt really embarrassed, but more importantly, I felt relieved about the entire situation. I brushed off the whole thing as it just being late, and my mind playing some massive tricks on me. The next day, I went to leave my apartment when I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. I went outside and only took a few steps towards my car when I saw maintenance over there carrying out the old refrigerator. I was puzzled. I walked over to the apartment and I looked in the door that was wide open. The kitchen was still being worked on, and not a piece of furniture could be seen. I was legitimately speechless. I walked over to the maintenance man and said, "Didn't someone just move in here?" He informed me no, and that the apartment wouldn't be ready for showings until at least 3 weeks from now. I ran back upstairs into my apartment and called the landlord. I asked her if someone was staying there, and she told me absolutely not. I told her about what I had experienced the night before. She was immediately floored. She told me that they would change the apartment's locks right away. She also suggested that I call the non-emergency line to the police department and informed them that nobody lived there. I did just that, and they asked me to come down to the station. I told them all of the information in detail of what had happened. They were able to quickly figure out what officer came out to check the situation, so he could help identify the person who answered the door. The officer described the man in detail, and I confirmed that I had never seen him at all around the apartments before. There was a search around town for a few weeks, until the whole thing just sort of fizzled out, and I stopped hearing about it. I started seeing less and less patrol cars randomly in the parking lot. After that night, I never heard another thing in that apartment. Around a month later, an older couple moved in, and they're very nice. When I saw the moving van pull up, I went out to introduce myself to them. But to be completely honest, the only reason I went out there was to see if any of them matched the description of who the cops saw. Not even close. I'm certain that the person who was in that apartment got away with it. I had an extremely hard time sleeping the following weeks of that happening to me. I actually ended up moving my bed into the smaller second bedroom because it bothered me so much. I have zero idea of what the intentions of the person were, or why he was listening to me on that staircase, but it's easily one of the most chilling things that have ever happened to me. Ever since I was 14 years old, I've been scared of lightning. It started when I was out on a soccer field during a thunderstorm, and lightning struck the fence just over 100 feet away from me. The sound was deafening, and I can still remember the awful sensation of it vibrating through my whole body. But this wouldn't be my only incident involving a lightning strike that I came close to. The next time, it wouldn't only scare me, it would also be my salvation. When I turned 20, I moved out from my parents who live in the capital of my country to a small community in the south, and I have no intention on moving back. Sure, a girl that grew up in the city is used to the endless variation of restaurants, bars, and stores that never close, a city that never sleeps. But I like it here. Despite the low population of the community, and something of a sleepy town stamp on it, it's charming with its colorful wooden houses, the seaside campus, and the smell of butter from the old butter factory, as an eternal reminder of where you are. I can practically go out whenever I want, wherever I want, and meet a total of 10 people, the neighborhood cats, and if I'm lucky, a cute but lost hedgehog. There's one more reason why I appreciate living in a small town. It's how incredibly safe I feel here. In the city, you can barely be outside alone as a woman after 10 p.m. without feeling such discomfort that you feel compelled to check behind you once or twice every minute. All such discomfort, however, doesn't only happen after said time or during the darkest hours of the day. It can happen at any time. That's something you learn. Something I had to learn. I was 17 and it was the summer holidays. I was spending most of it at my then boyfriend's house, and he lived with his family about 20 minutes outside of the city. I lived with my parents at the time in the city center, just along the green subway line, so if I wanted to get back home, I had to take the commuter train to the central station, walk across it and switch to the green subway line, ride a few minutes on there to get to my station. I was then in one of my rebellious periods, and had a month before I bleached my hair. I loved it at first, but after a while my roots started to show and I realized my mistake. My angel of a mother had tired of my fuss over it, and booked me at a hairdresser so that I could go back to my natural deep brown hair color. The day for my appointment at the hairdresser came, and I was as usual at my boyfriend's, but I needed something from my parents' apartment first, so I put on my headphones and jumped on the commuter train. I switched as usual to the green line, and sat near one of the doors that I knew would line up perfectly to where I would get off. I like to crowd watch a bit when I travel. Not to stare people out or anything like that, but just to look at people and think about where they're going, what they do for work, or maybe make up a story about them. It's a kind of game that I often find myself playing on the subway or the commuter train. I played that game that day. I looked around at people, and when there was one station left until my stop, my eyes stuck to a man who was sitting a few feet in front of me. He was tall, perhaps in his mid-30s. His hair was dark and scruffy, wearing dark clothes and big boots. He sat with his elbows leaning against his knees, crouching slightly down towards the subway floor. Today, I don't remember what my analysis or fictional story was of him, but I know that I saw him. The woman in the speaker shouted out my destination, and I stood up and went to the doors and stepped off. When I got out of the doors of the station, I saw that it had begun to rain, so I pulled my big hood over the headphones and started to quickly walk up to the apartment, which was only a few hundred feet from the station. The apartment is an old building with a large wooden door facing the street. The door has a glass pane that runs along the entire door, and when you enter the staircase is entirely in marble, with an old wooden elevator with an iron lattice door that you have to close manually. When I got to the door, I put in the entry code and pushed it up. When the door was swung aside, though, something was reflected in the glass. I turned around and saw the man from the subway standing right behind me. At first, I was a little shocked that he was so close to me, but I assumed that he had to be one of my neighbors, or maybe a neighbor's friend. I also assumed that he stood so close to me because it was raining, and he didn't want to get wet. I said hello and pressed up the door an extra time with my hip while I took off my headphones. He did not answer. I went to the lift and pressed the button, but I heard that it didn't start, so I assumed that the neighbors had opened the lattice door to park the elevator at their floor while they locked their door. I turned around and saw the man standing behind me, shaking. It wasn't that typical type of shaking that's common if you have a fever or a cold, but more like spastic twitching. He stood there jerking, with his head and his back curved as he had on the subway, but this time his eyes were not on the floor. They were on me. He opened his mouth to talk, but only incoherent sounds came out, while shaking and jerking became more frantic. "What's your name?" he said at last. I remembered my parents' words of wisdom to never tell your name to a stranger, especially one whom you feel threatened by. I wanted to tell him to go, but I felt like I was frozen, and provoking him might make the situation worse. I replied with a false name. He then asked, "Do you live here?" I lied and answered that I didn't, that I'm just here to see a friend. I remember thinking that I was really smart. Now he didn't know my name or where I lived, I thought, but it was now that he started moving closer to me. I started trying to back away. He must have seen the fear in my eyes, but he continued scuffling towards me. I heard the elevator engine start ticking, and that it was on its way down. He told me that he had been following me on the train, that he saw me there, and he just had to follow me. It was now that he lifted his head from his previous position, showing me how extremely tall he was, and the shaking stopped. He spoke again. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." If I thought I was frozen before, that was an understatement. I was now pressed against the elevator door, and it was so close that I could feel his scent. Some may think that these words still have to be somewhat flattering, but the way he said it, it sounded like a death sentence, like something bad. Bad for me. It was about when I heard the elevator stop on the first floor, and someone walked down the stairs to the courtyard door. That door is located on a small platform between the ground floor and first floor stairs. You also know how you can recognize and distinguish your parents' steps from others? I did this with these steps that came down the stairs, and I heard that they were my father's. I quickly thought that I should scream for him, but then I realized that the man would know that I had first lied, and that he might get angry and do something to my old father. That was when my father opened the door to the courtyard, and lightning struck the yard. The sound waves of the crackling lightning pressed itself through the open door and made the whole marble stairwell echo. I screamed. The man screamed. I went to my usual position regarding thunder and lightning, a fetal position on the floor. The man, on the other hand, jumped backwards and started running out while he shouted that we would be seeing each other again soon. I barely realized what had happened. I went crying up in the elevator and into the apartment where I told everything to my mother and my father when he came up from the courtyard. We reported the incident to the police, and I went and dyed my hair, which made me feel a little safer because my appearance had changed quite drastically. I was still a little scared after the incident, but also confused. I just kept thinking about what he was saying when he ran out. We'll be seeing each other again soon. I knew at least that I absolutely did not want to ever see him again. However, I didn't get what I wanted. After about a month passed, I had practically forgotten about the whole situation. I was on my way to the central station to meet up with my boyfriend, who was on the commuter train on his way to me. I stood and waited for him in the hallway between the commuter trains and the subway. In that particular hallway, a lot of people are walking, either to the trains or from them. Very few people are standing still in it. As I said, I stood there, looked down the hallway from time to time to try and see if my boyfriend had come yet. When I see someone else standing still, there was someone standing on the other side of the crowd, and although everyone goes in different directions and creates a kind of blurred effect on him, I saw who it is. I freeze just like before. The man stares at me, not like our first meeting, but as if he's trying to make up if I am who he thinks I am, behind the new hair. Then my boyfriend comes from the crowd and hugs me. I have to look away from the man for a few seconds to hug him back. I leaned my head against his shoulder and looked over to see if the man was still there, but I saw that he had disappeared. I've never seen the man since, but I wonder, has he seen me? So this happened over the span of around a year, when I was 15 or 16. I'm 20 now, and it's only recently been revealed to me how fucked up the situation really was. I was obviously still living at home at the time, but my sister, who's about 7 years older than me, had moved out and was living with her now husband, their high school best friend, and some other dude they met via one of those find-a-roommate sites. He was kind of the reclusive nerdy type, much preferring to hide in his room watching Star Trek and playing computer games than to actually hang out with the roommates, and the only person he ever really seemed to want to be around was his similarly shy and nerdy girlfriend. For a little context to the story, at the time this happened he was 28 and she was 24. They were both a little bit weird, but initially they seemed entirely harmless. For ease of telling the story and for saving on characters, the friendly roommate will be FR, the weird roommate will be WR, and his weird girlfriend will be WGF. Now my sister and I have never really had the best of relationships with our parents, and at this point things were especially rocky. Our mother was dating a man who was, to put it kindly, an abusive sack of shit, who seemingly loathed me and would find any excuse to go off at me. As a result, I spent a lot of time staying over at my sister's place. It was around the time I'd spent a lot of time there that WR and WGF started to get very strange. As I said earlier, the pair of them had always been somewhat odd. They only ever seemed to want to speak with each other, and would even go as far as to ignore anyone else who spoke to them. WGF was worse than WR for this by a mile. He would at least give you monosyllabic responses most of the time. She had a kind of creepy habit of just blankly staring at you for a few seconds, then walking away if you asked her a question, or tried to engage her in conversation at all. This isn't the really weird behavior, though. When I would stay over, I'd sleep on a futon in FR's office space, which was on the ground floor. It happened to be next to the downstairs bathroom, which for some reason WGF vastly preferred to the upstairs one. She would take long showers in the middle of the night, which is whatever. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper, and she wasn't a shower singer or anything like that, so I generally slept right through them. One night, however, I stayed up mega late doing revision and homework, and happened to be awake as she finished her shower. I was too absorbed in my task to really pay attention to anything else, but I definitely noted hearing the shower shut off, because that was my indicator to how goddamn late it really was. Approximately 10 minutes later, I look up from my laptop and there she is. I always kept the door open just a crack, because the room tended to get unbearably hot if I didn't. She was standing there outside the room, butt-ass naked, watching me through the open crack in the door. I said her name and asked if she was okay, which seemingly startled her, because she walked away pretty sharply. I convinced myself that in my over-caffeinated, sleep-deprived state, I had imagined the whole thing, and didn't mention it to anyone. Fast forward around a month, and head over to my sister's one night and find FR kind of agitated about what he perceives to be a peeping Tom problem. He found fingerprints on the outside of his office window, in such a way that would imply someone had been pressing up against the glass and looking in. The blind in his room was slightly too small for the window, so you could see in from the outside if you looked through at the sides, and the room was on the front of the house. The window was easily accessible from the street. He'd become concerned that some random passing pervert had been spying on him when he was having a private moment, so to speak, in his office, or else some potential burglar had been sizing up the joint. The police were called, but as they didn't have any external CCTV at this point, no evidence could be provided, and ultimately not a lot could be done. To combat this escalating further, FR installed both internal and external CCTV on the house. This was installed whilst WR and WGF were away on a holiday, and I guess everyone just forgot to tell them about it. Another couple of months later, I go to my sister's to find WR's room empty, and they inform me that he had moved out. Of course, I asked why, and I was informed simply that he and WGF were a pair of fucking creeps, and the others had collectively decided to kick them out. Apparently, her watching me through the office door was not a one-time incident. The CCTV footage showed that she regularly made a habit of standing and watching me through the cracked door, sometimes for as long as 20 or 30 minutes. I was just usually asleep when she did it. Not only that, but the fingerprints on the window had quite apparently been from WR standing outside and watching me after I'd showered and was hanging out in just a towel. It was a less regular occurrence, but apparently was caught on camera enough times for it to be concerning. As if that wasn't weird enough in itself, I was recently hanging out with my sister and her husband, and he passed a comment about how he wishes they'd told me the full story at the time, so I could have pressed charges. I asked what he meant by that. He revealed that not only had they both been secretly watching me, the CCTV showed that they'd messed with the food and stuff that I bought, including clips of him licking all of my apples, her spitting in my orange juice, even dumping cow's milk into my lactose-free food, which explained why I had a period of feeling really sick from nowhere. To top it off, apparently when FR barged into their room to confront them about it, he not only found that several shirts I thought I'd misplaced elsewhere had been stolen by the two of them and literally hung up on their wall. She had done several drawings of me sleeping and written a poem called Ode to My Name, whose contents I don't know, and I never really want to. Apparently FR gave them an ultimatum of 2 hours to get the fuck out of this house and never contact me or any of us again, or he'd call the police. They took the former option. They've never tried to contact me subsequent to this, but I feel sick thinking of what they were potentially planning.